Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, April 27th, 2015, start of a brand new week. We have got lots to talk about today. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room ready to answer the phone when you call on in. I want to get the Nepal earthquake information out of the way, and then we're going to be talking about Baltimore. This thing is obviously being fanned up, and frankly, I smell a big, fat USDA choice rat on this situation. Now, as you know, over the weekend, Nepal was hit with a 7.9 magnitude quake and a series of major aftershocks. According to media in the region, the death toll is already above 4,000. What we have here, let's see, 944 in Sindapalchwak, 913 in Kathmandu, 299 in Dading, 234 in Bhaktapur, 422 in Nuwakot, 223 in Gorkha, 193 in Kavre, 155 in Lilliputtur, 150 in Rusawa, 65 in Dolaka, 33 in Malwanpur, 26 in Ramachap, 16 Kotang and Okadanga each. And I'm sure they haven't found all of them. Almost 7,000 reported wounded, major emergency effort underway. And as you heard on the SRN, there was a U.S. military unit in the area. U.S. is sending in all this aid, which is a good thing to do. But I have to ask, why, if the U.S. has the resources to go in and help the earthquake victims in Nepal, why they couldn't be bothered to get the Americans out of the war zone in Yemen? Because possibly they wanted some bloody shirts to wave to support a U.S. ground invasion of Yemen. Meanwhile, some bad news from Mount Everest, because apparently the main quake and some of the aftershocks have triggered avalanches there. 22 Mount Everest climbers are known dead at this time. Another 200 missing, probably because they're finding their own way out of the region from the base camp. One of the supporters of our show here, their daughter was on the mountain, but the last word we've got is she's okay and is making her way out with her associates as well. It's a very dangerous place up there. All righty, let's see. Now, I want to get on to Baltimore. This thing is being fanned up here. Maryland governor sends state troopers as protest mount over police murder of Freddie Gray. Now, over the weekend, Al Jazeera was covering this, and they made a point of saying that for the most part, the demonstrations were peaceful. The violence is confined to a very tiny area, coincidentally, right in front of the U.S. media cameras. This is feeling like a made-up situation. Now, there's actually a video where the Baltimore mayor is saying that she made sure the police gave space for those who wanted to destroy. They want to cause damage, back up and let them do that. And it looks like this is another one of these efforts to try and provoke nationwide race riots, leading to a declaration of a national emergency, martial law, suspension of what's left of the Bill of Rights, gun confiscation. We know that the Rodney King riots were a staged setup by agent provocateurs, Operations Cable Splice and Garden Plot. We saw that when the whole Trayvon Martin George Zimmerman case was coming down, and the media was the whole week before the Zimmerman verdict, if he's acquitted, there'll be riots across the country, and there weren't, because everybody knew that's what the government wanted. We know that the Department of Justice actually admitted sending agitators in there to support the protesters, and they did the same thing in Ferguson. They did the same thing in the aftermath of Eric Garner. And now we're up here in Baltimore seeing exactly the same thing. Now, we are seeing reports from the people in Baltimore that the people causing the violence are total strangers. They're from out of town. They don't live in Baltimore. We heard the exact same thing in Ferguson. The people who were there smashing windows and wrecking cars and causing the violence don't live there. They're agent provocateurs. Now, of course, the media is out there saying there's a credible threat from the Baltimore gangs. They're going to take out the police officers. This has justified sending in SWAT officers. And I was listening on the live feed of the Baltimore Police Radio, and it's just push, 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 confront, confront, confront. We even had another story over here about these Department of Justice consultants, these two protesters, the best protesters in history, the media is calling them, that were leading the violence in Ferguson. Now they're on the ground in Baltimore. And there's a YouTube video we put up at whatreallyhappened.com. The media is full of pictures of this woman who's getting her purse snatched. It turns out this same woman, that same purse snatcher, that same purse were photographed multiple times in different parts of Baltimore. It's a staging. It's another crisis actor. And I'm saying this because to everybody out there, right now the U.S. government would love to have an excuse to suspend the Bill of Rights, start gun confiscation, shut down what's left of our freedom of speech. They're certainly trying to spin this to make the police look like they're heroic and not to blame for this. And gosh darn it, those protesters, they deserve to have their necks broken anyway. Do not fall for it. This is Kent State all over again. Kent State was a peaceful protest against the war in Vietnam. Undercover FBI informant fired a starting pistol, and that allowed the National Guard to fire into the protesters. This is a repeating pattern. Do not fall for it. The U.S. government wants riots. They can use them to take away what's left of your rights and freedoms. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. We're going to go to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I wanted to just, for the earthquake, my prayers go out for the survivors over there and the people there, and hopefully maybe you can get some real help from the Russians or the Chinese, because, you know, we're helping people on one end of the earth and bombing people on the other. Does that make sense?
It really doesn't. And like I said, the contrast where the U.S. is getting ready to go into Nepal with all of this aid here, and yet the Americans who are trapped under the Saudi offensive in Yemen were just told, you're on your own, get out, and the Russians are evacuating them. And those Americans are very angry. And I think the reason is the U.S. wanted the Yemenites to start grabbing Americans and killing them in order to build support for a U.S. ground invasion, because the Saudi ground invasion is already running into trouble. We're going to talk about that in a little bit.
And, the Baltimore thing is a classic divide and conquer strategy. This is all orchestrated by, like, the George Soros and other people to fan the flames, just like the Ukrainian Maiden. Same thing.
Yeah, it really is, and they're trying desperately to make this a racial issue, black versus white, and it isn't. What has provoked these confrontations in all these cities is police brutality. And that's exactly what's going on here. And they're trying to come out there and say, well, see, there's a reason the police have to be brutal, because look at how evil those American people have become. That's what they're trying to do out there.
I wanted to mention, is Greece and Russia supposed to have a meeting tomorrow? Because I remember hearing that last week that there might be a meeting between them two tomorrow.
I heard word of it. I don't have any more details about it, but I'm sure, Russia's rolling out the red carpet to Greece right now. And, Greece needs a lifeline, and Putin's got his hand on the rope.
Yeah, we're in Rome territory now, though. You can see with all these riots, it's what a mess.
Yeah, in the time of Caligula. That's how wacko our government has become. Okay, anything? And
we're all going to pay for it, Mike. We're all going to pay for it.
We're already paying for it. We're already suffering under this new American empire. And it's unfortunately going to get worse before it gets better.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. I'm watching the feed. They're talking about stores are closed in downtown Baltimore because of the threat of violence. They've got the police out there with their body shields and everything. Apparently some of the agent provocateurs are throwing rocks at them, just trying to fan this situation up. Yeah, just like we saw in Maidan, just like we saw in Ferguson, just like we saw in the Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case, just like we saw in Los Angeles back during Rodney King. This is how you start a riot for political gain, and that's exactly what I think is going on in Baltimore right now. We'll be back after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're watching the situation devolve over in Baltimore, and this is all the corporate media is talking about right now, the crisis in Baltimore, the standoff between violent protesters, gangs, and the SWAT team, and lots of dramatic camera cuts and moving the camera around in the helicopter shot. But having watched this for close to 3/4 of an hour now, it's the same group of 25 people just going from place to place to place causing a ruckus. This feels like another manufactured propaganda operation, and the best reason to assume this is another U.S. government staged operation is because of all the other staged operations, going all the way back to Kent State. And I hope people will stop, calm down, and think carefully before they get suckered in by some undercover FBI informant and get played and possibly killed as well. So I'm hoping that calm will prevail here. But it's a theater production. 25 actors as rioters, and the police back up, back up, back up, back up. Same thing we saw in Los Angeles. Alrighty, we're going to move on here to some other situations. We'll be keeping an eye on Baltimore, but there are other events happening in the world, although you'd never know it from the current corporate American media. Yemen is in serious trouble right now, certainly for the people on the ground there. We're looking at an article over in Global Research saying that the corporate narrative of Yemen is grossly misleading, trying to basically sell this idea that, those people of Yemen don't have a right to kick out their U.S.-imposed puppet, Hadi, and bring back their own President Saleh. Now, last week Saudi Arabia claimed Operation Decisive Storm was over, and it was over long enough for the Saudi planes to refuel, and now they're pounding the Yemen capital. They're bombing the strikes around the presidential palace, not actually the palace itself. And according to a Russian source, Saudi Arabia is bombing fuel and food depots in Yemen. They're trying to starve those people of Yemen into gladly accepting back their U.S. puppet ruler. Now, the reality is that just before Saudi Arabia attacked, the government of Yemen was actually in peace talks with Saleh about his coming back and forming a coalition to calm things down. Now, of course, with the bombing underway, the government of Yemen, the remnants of the U.S. puppet regime, even though their president is now in Saudi Arabia, are out there saying, absolutely, we will not talk with Saleh. It's him or us. That's, you're either with us or against us. And the bombs continue to fall, and the attitude from the U.S. government is you will accept and love your U.S. puppet ruler, and you will like it. And not too surprisingly, and I told you this was going to happen a week ago, the U.S. government has now announced that ISIS is in Yemen. Oh, my goodness, it's ISIS. Well, of course we have to go on in there and bomb and invade the place. Now, the confrontation with Iran that we were being told about has gone away. First of all, it was a convoy of Iranian warships. They're bringing weapons. They're going to find. Then it turned out to be cargo ships full of humanitarian aid. And the U.S. sent in the U.S. aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt and the guided missile cruiser to stand in front of the humanitarian aid and say, you can't go there. Yemen backed down. The convoy full of food and medical supplies is on its way back to Iran, and the Theodore Roosevelt is heading back into the Gulf. So that little confrontation is sort of fizzled. Now, over in Saudi Arabia, they've been talking for the last several days about a potential ground invasion. Go on in, and we're just going to kill everybody who wants the former president back, and that will calm things down. But they've run into a problem. There are reports that some 4,000 Saudi forces have deserted rather than march into Yemen. And the most likely reason for that is Saudi Arabia builds its military forces mostly from mercenaries and conscripts from other countries, including Yemen. Somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the Saudi ground forces are originally from Yemen itself. Of course, they don't want to go back in and kill their friends and families and neighbors. They don't want to invade their own home country and burn it to the ground. So I'm not surprised that they're seeing a lot of desertions, and that's why the U.S. is going to have to find some way to come on in. Oh, ISIS is in Yemen. The Yemenites were taking American nationals and torturing them. That didn't work out, by the way. Russia got those American nationals out that were abandoned there by their own government. And those American nationals are on TV all over Europe saying they abandoned us there. Our government abandoned us there. U.S. government's on its way into Nepal to look good, helping with the earthquake victims, and that's a wonderful thing to do. But it underscores the fact that the United States absolutely abandoned American nationals in Yemen. They wanted dead, bloody bodies to put on TV. Death count so far in the month of Saudi bombing of Yemen includes 115 children killed, 172 injured. What does bombing and killing children have to do with putting down the evil rebels? Doesn't have anything to do with it. Saudi Arabia is making war on the people of Yemen for refusing to bow down to foreign rule. And obviously my sentiments are with the people of Yemen. Nobody in any country should accept rule by a foreign government, because that rule by a foreign government is never for your benefit. It's to loot you, your wealth, your children for the benefit of that foreign power. Just ask any member of the United States Congress who's bowing and davening to Tel Aviv these days. Look how much wealth has been stripped out of the American nation and given to Israel. Just so long as Israel goes on writing really fat campaign donation checks to American politicians. The people of Iran didn't like foreign puppet rule. The people of Iraq didn't like foreign puppet rule. The people of Yemen don't like foreign puppet rule. The people of Libya don't like foreign puppet rule. And I can tell you right now, this American doesn't like foreign rule in this country. Why should we be happy with it when everybody else thinks it's a bad idea? And why should we expect them to be happy with foreign rule? Now, up in Ukraine, Kiev has announced their readiness for an escalated war. They're going to crank up the aggression against the eastern Ukrainian republics. That's what Poroshenko's been spending all of that money being poured in by IMF and World Bank and private investors. And apparently, Kiev is starting to build a border wall along the border with Russia to basically trap the eastern Ukrainians. Even if there's no more war, that wall makes it impossible for eastern Ukraine to try and do business with Russia, which is who they want to do business with. This is a revival of the Berlin Wall. I don't know what they're going to call this one, the Great Wall of Ukraine, the Great Wall of Kiev. But it's just another wall like the Berlin Wall, and it is unjust. It is a war crime, and it will not last. We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show here, and everybody's looking at what's going on in Ukraine. It is so obvious the U.S. wants this war. They need this war because if the economy collapses and they don't have anything to blame it on, we, the American people, are going to point the finger of guilt where it richly deserves to go. Wall Street corruption, aided and abetted by Washington, D.C. corruption. And so we're seeing articles in places like my catbird seat, Washington choreographing all-out war with Russia. Ever since the U.S.-backed coup d'etat against the legitimate government of Ukraine a year ago, little over a year ago, it's been one provocation after another. Oh, Putin shot down Flight 17. Putin is sneaking weapons across the border. Putin's doing this. It's all Putin's fault. Hate the Russians, love the U.S. government, be ready to send your children off to death and disfigurement. Now, right now, there are U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine. There are all these paratroopers, but they're only advisors. They're only trainers. But they are starting to train the Ukrainian National Guard for war fighting. Now, remember, Kiev's got a major problem. Their forces don't like the idea of killing their fellow Ukrainians. Desertion has become a major problem. Avoiding the conscription has been a big problem. These are not well-motivated fighters, and that means if they get into combat with their American trainers, guess who's going to wind up doing most of the fighting? Because that's exactly what happened in Vietnam. U.S. is going to provide an additional $17 million to Ukraine, all in humanitarian aid. Trust us, it's not lethal aid here. And, of course, nothing at all in support for the homeless and hungry American people. It's like abandon the Americans in Yemen, send aid to Nepal. Abandon homeless and hungry Americans here in America, send aid to Ukraine. Kind of makes you wonder what their priorities really are. Alrighty, now this coalition against Russia is showing signs of strain. Several of the European countries have already stopped abiding by the U.S. sanctions against Russia. They're starting to do business again. They're starting to bring their economies back from the hammering that they took going along with the U.S. agenda. And now we are hearing that European Union leaders have decided that they are not going to get involved in Ukraine. Even though clashes are escalating in eastern Ukraine, Kiev has basically announced the ceasefire is over, we're going to go and start killing these people, and the European Union leaders are saying, well, you know, we know that there's a ceasefire and we're not going to violate it. We're not going to send peacekeepers. So once again, the U.S. is shouting coalition, coalition, all of our European allies, and once again, it's going to come down to pretty much unilateral action by the United States with a few token foreigners thrown in for the press briefings. Oh, yes, we're in Ukraine, and we've got 3 people from Tonga, and we've got 5 from Micronesia, and that proves it's an international coalition here. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has gone public with evidence that the U.S. has been backing militants in the North Caucasus Mountains to fan them up, to destabilize Russia. And at this point, everybody understands that's what the U.S. does. They've been doing it since the end of World War II. The days of frontal invasion are over. Send in the agents, overthrow the government, install a puppet. U.S. has done it, tried to do it, to 50 countries since the end of World War II, succeeding about half the time. They even tried to do it to France. The U.S. government tried to overthrow the government of France. It didn't succeed. And just so that you understand, it was only a couple of years later that France demanded the redemption of their Federal Reserve notes in gold, which led to Nixon's ending gold convertibility and Bretton Woods. So there's always going to be payback to these situations where you go into a supposedly friendly nation and try and replace the government with one that's a little more friendly. Questions continue to be asked about 1.3 billion, with a B, taxpayer dollars that went into Afghanistan, supposedly under the control of U.S. military officers, and it vanished, and the Pentagon won't even comment on this. Now remember the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld got up there at the Pentagon and basically admitted $3 trillion, with a T, dollars had vanished from the U.S. defense budget. That's $3 trillion of your dollars. Get out a calculator, take $3 trillion, divide it by 320 million, current population of the U.S., to find out how much was taken from your pocket that simply vanished. And it should have been the financial scandal of the decade, but thankfully for Donald Rumsfeld and the Pentagon, just 24 hours later, 9/11 happened. And in an amazing coincidence not to be believed, one of the planes, the plane that hit the Pentagon, hit the offices of the accountants where they were trying to find where that money had gone. Think about that one for a while here. The commander of Iran's ground forces has gone out publicly saying that, yes, the U.S. masterminded the 9/11 attacks to justify intervention in the Middle East. It's a little slow to the gate, but they're all catching on bit by bit by bit by bit. Yes, of course the U.S. orchestrated 9/11. They orchestrate all of these crises and terrorist attacks. Oklahoma City, Waco, Baltimore, to get us to do what they want us to do. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Keith in Missouri. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
No, you had it right the first time. It was Montana.
It is Montana. Okay.
Hi, Mike. Hey, I had a thought for you there. If you Google the so-called Ukraine border security fence, you'll see that it's being furnished by the U.S. State Department.
Ah, thank you for that insight. So the U.S. government, the U.S. taxpayer are paying for the new Berlin Wall.
Right, and if you Google the U.S.-Mexican border, you'll see that the Israelis are building that one.
Boy, oh boy. They are insane.
And all I can say about the U.S.-Mexican border one is who better to build a border security fence than occupiers.
Yes, absolutely.
Good day, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to switch over to Alburn in Georgia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I don't know if it's a false flag or not. I just wanted to know if you had seen this terrible video that's been going viral a little bit of the Ukrainian SS crucifying a pro-Russian rebel, and your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it feels phony to me, and it was sent to me by a whole bunch of people. It just feels like it's a made-up provocation. Not as well done as the ISIS videos, I'll grant you, but it just didn't feel right.
Who would false flag something like that, though?
Well, obviously, if you're going to start, putting out these kind of false flags with Christian imagery, we already know that Israel is trying to find some way to get a new holy crusade going between all the world's Christians and all the world's Muslims, and then they're going to stand off to one side and laugh themselves silly while we kill each other off. But we'd have to look and see, who stands to gain from this. And we know that obviously Poroshenko needs the violence to escalate because he cannot quit as things stand right now, with having basically lost control of the eastern Ukrainian districts and Crimea. And so he definitely wants the war to escalate. The U.S. wants the war to escalate. They're literally trying to provoke a new Cold War with Russia, if not a hot war.
All right, thanks, Mike, for your insight. Appreciate it, buddy.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. Now then, speaking of Israel, and we're coming up on a commercial break, Israel has launched airstrikes across the Syrian border. They're saying, we saw a militant with explosives, and they uncorked on the Golan Heights. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show. We're still following the situation in Baltimore. Of course, it's coming up on 5 o'clock in the evening there, and I have a feeling that once the sun sets, things may get a little more dicey. We're seeing the police are using tear gas, the protesters are using rocks, sticks, things like that. At some point, I'm going to venture that an agent provocateur is going to fire a shot at the police force in order to allow the police to bring up all their brand new military hardware and just stomp the protesters flat as an object lesson to the rest of us slaves. Now, before we went to the commercial break, we're talking about how Israel is starting to flex their military muscles. They're firing into Golan. They're claiming that they saw a militant with explosives. Of course, Israel always has an excuse. Bottle rocket over the fence. They looked at us wrong. God gave us this land. Whatever excuse they need to continue their aggression. And we're seeing over at BATR.org an article asking if Israel is building up to Operation Opera 2. And this is a reference to the original Operation Opera, which was Israel's code name for the mission that went into Iraq in 1981 and bombed their civilian nuclear power station at Osirak under the excuse that Iraq was building nuclear bombs in the basement. Now, following the 2003 invasion, international inspectors examined the ruins of Osirak and said, by golly, it was just a power station. And then, of course, one of the pilots who led that bombing mission into Iraq got himself a ride on the space shuttle Columbia, and it turned out to be a one-way trip, and it was almost embarrassing where the American corporate media, following the loss of Columbia, it was like all they could talk about was, Israel's first astronaut. And it was like, there were 7 other people on board that ship. Don't they count? No, of course they don't count. Anyway. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Damien in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. How you doing? Good to talk to you. Happy Monday. Just what you were saying about Israel. I mean, this is really I think constantly it's the same tactics again. They're just being able to instigate any way they like. I really would not be surprised if they're just, they have people inside of on the other side of the line, just like sort of firing bottle rockets to do the work for them. If they're not,
of course they do. Of course they do. Israel's whole history is one false flag attack after another. The Lebanon affair, the attack on the USS Liberty, the attack on the USS Cole, the attack on the World Trade Center. This is how Israel gets things done.
I just don't understand how this disproportionate show of force that how that can even be supported as, we're protecting ourselves. I don't understand. I really just will never be able to understand how that's possible. Anywhere in the world you go, you can't say, if we throw rocks at somebody, I'm going to throw a missile. I'm going to fire a missile at your face. I mean,
Israel gets away with it because they bribe all of our politicians to nod like those little dolls on the back of your car, with the head on the spring. Yes, Israel has a right to defend itself, and the American corporate media. And I think at this point, the American people are really beginning to understand that we too are an occupied nation. We have a Vichy government in Washington, D.C. that rules this nation not for America and the American people, but for their masters in Israel. I mean, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. You've got, all these GOP candidates. They're out there sucking up to Sheldon Adelson. They're not even talking about domestic issues. I am a friend of Israel. I will stand with Israel. I will block the Iran deal. It's like that's all they can think about. They don't want to talk about hunger and homelessness in the United States of America. They don't want to talk about our collapsing infrastructure. They don't want to talk about any of that stuff. It's just every word out of their mouth. I stand with Israel. I posted a photo of Ted Cruz to my website over the weekend, and he's standing in front of a flag of Canada and a flag of Israel. And my comment was, I get a sense there's something missing from this picture. Can't quite put my finger on it, but there is something missing from this picture.
Yeah, unbelievable. It's unbelievable. There's just one thing I want to say about Baltimore. If people take a look at where things started to turn violent during the day, the other day, you'll see there's one specific person with a hat on and a scarf over his face, and I don't think the guy was. I'm not saying that this could start this way or that way. I'm just saying I don't think the guy was black. He jumped on top of a car, he started bashing, and that seemed to be the instigation of everything. So I would not be surprised if that was video evidence of an agent provocateur right there. Anybody who's justifying or saying that violent protest or violence in general is the right thing, is the right way to go, or that I approve of this or whatever. They are just doing the work of the exact people that are just going to basically say that, okay, you're giving us the impetus, you're giving us the reason to go ahead and violate your rights because you're doing this or you're doing that. And just like you said, I think it was the mayor you said that told the cops, step back, let them be violent, give them their space. And sure, you give them their space, let them be violent. They'll just, things will get worse and worse, and then the cops will be able to say, well, look, we gave you a chance, and that's it. So here we go, we're coming in.
Yeah, and it's starting to escalate there. I'm looking at the Fox feed right now, and somebody set a car on fire. I think it's a police car. I think some of the ammunition stored in it is starting to cook off because I'm seeing these little pops within the flames. But yeah, we know the U.S. government likes to kick up trouble to get what they want. Oh, look at those gosh darn Baltimore people. They're bad. And those poor police, they're good. And, this led to the disaster at Waco because the BATF had been given police powers, and they'd gone out and they'd had a string of absolute disasters, kicking down wrong doors, killing innocent people. And a lot of Americans were saying, well, we need to take away the BATF's police authority. And Congress was starting to listen and say, yeah, they really are out of control. They're making us all look bad. And that's why the BATF decided they were going to raid this little church commune in Waco, Texas, who supported their little church by buying broken guns, repairing them, and reselling them, which is a very common thing to do in Texas. So they said, we're going to go down, we're going to confiscate their guns, we're going to show all the guns they have and prove that we are necessary for the safety of the American people. And, of course, it all went downhill from there. And this really does feel like more of the same is going on here, and mostly because we know that representatives of the Department of Justice were trying to kick up the violence during that Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case, tried to do it again in Ferguson, tried to do it again in the wake of Eric Garner's death, and now they're doing it again in Baltimore. They're just going to keep on pushing until they can get nationwide race riots and demonize all the black people, demonize all the gun owners, declare martial law and say, well, we have to exert more control over Americans because Americans can't be trusted, to have their own opinions and, and all this other nonsense about the police, because it's police brutality is what brought us to this stage. And the government obviously condones this behavior by the police, or they would have done something about it. Yes, there have been a couple of prosecutions where the cops were obviously in the wrong. But overall, I mean, it's like where, I think it was a week ago, where these cops shot this teenager, unarmed teenager, 16 times, and the chief of police said, the police are doing what they're trained to do. And that tells you right there.
That is true. That is true. They're doing exactly what they're trained to do. And people have to realize that if nobody's standing up and condemning this, you don't hear a politician standing up or going to these places to condemn this, it's because the police are doing exactly what they're trained to do.
Okay, 7 officers injured in Baltimore, and now they're bringing out the heavy armed vehicles, the tactical units,
there you go.
The one with the gun turret on the top. Yeah, they want a major riot so they can say, oh, those gosh darn, those people who don't like the government, we've got to do something about them. All right, well, listen, Damien, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much. We're going to try and fit Michael in Tennessee in before the top of the hour news break. Michael, what's on your mind?
This is real quick, but you mentioned Waco. I think the thing we forget about Waco is what happened the Friday before with the First World Trade Center bombing, and then the ATF hit the supposed cult that Sunday. It would have been great headlines for the ATF protects us from all these religious fanatics who are stockpiling guns after the World Trade Center just got bombed by religious fanatics.
Well, you're right. The timing may have also been they needed a distraction from a botched false flag terror attack. Remember, after TWA 800 came down and the media was starting to focus on all the eyewitness reports of a missile, what happened? The Olympic Park bombing. Change the focus. Yeah. Quickly get something to happen to take the media off of it. Anyway, Mike, the timing. All right. Well. Okay, we're going to let you go. We got to take a break for news. I got to calm down and take a deep breath. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're keeping an eye on this situation in Baltimore, and they're making a big deal out of the police officers who've been wounded and injured, and, let's all feel bad for them. I'm sorry, I can't. We have been seeing police brutality against the American people for year after year after year, and the attitude of the corporate media was, well, somehow they deserved it, even when they clearly didn't. Now, Fox News has basically said the FBI is on the scene monitoring the situation. And that makes me very suspicious what's going on, because remember, the FBI has no jurisdiction off of federal territory, meaning the federal buildings and such, or when a crime is committed across a state border. Then the FBI comes in. For street crime on the streets of Baltimore, the FBI doesn't really have any legitimate reason to be there, unless they're keeping an eye on making sure that their undercover assets are not being unduly whooped on by the police. Now, getting on back to the situation in the Middle East, Israel has just announced they're going to build 77 new settlement units in East Jerusalem. Now, remember, under the original UN partition plan of Jerusalem, East Jerusalem is supposed to be Palestinian territory, but the government of Israel wants it all, and they have basically issued tenders for 77 new Jewish-only settlement units. Just keep on grabbing more and grabbing more and grabbing more. Now, one of the things Israel loves to do to the Palestinians is they'll block off huge tracts of the Palestinian farmland, saying they need it for a security buffer zone. Yes, we know your family has lived there for 1,000 years, and yes, we know that this is where you grow the food that you want to export, but we're going to push you back off of your own land because we need it kept open for security purposes. Then they turn around and allow the Israeli settlers to farm that land, even though it belongs to the Palestinians. So the Palestinians are still trying to play by the rules. They've submitted a petition to the High Court of Justice in Israel saying the land should be returned to them. Because if it's okay for the Israeli settlers who do not own that land to farm it, it should be okay for the Palestinians. Unfortunately, based on past history, I'm not expecting a positive outcome from the Israeli Court of High Justice. Once again, the Israeli Navy is attacking Palestinian fishing boats off of Gaza. Just opened fire without warning on another fishing boat, trying to sink it. And here's where you start to wonder what's really going on with these people, because there's an article that came out of the Realist Report where a top Jewish leader is now out there trying to sell the idea that the entire Western world is to blame for the Holocaust. Not just Germany, not just the Nazis, but everybody. It's all your fault collectively because you allowed it to happen. Now, as I recall, Americans sacrificed much blood and treasure to stop the Nazis from doing whatever it was they were really doing. And one of the strongest reasons to doubt the official Holocaust narrative is that today Israel does not act like they have anything to be grateful to America for. They still have their hand out for money and weapons. What about all those American families who lost their primary breadwinner in World War II? To stop the Nazis from completing whatever it is Israel claims they were trying to do. Should not Israel be sending us money for those families who were harmed? Apparently not. Now, President George W. Bush is now out there stumping around, attacking Obama on Middle East policy, which basically comes down to you're not supporting Israel enough, you're not making enough war on Iran, the Israeli agenda. And by doing so, of course, George W. Bush is sort of laying political foundations for his brother Jeb's run at the White House. So the situation's just getting really out of control. And I have a problem with the fact that we're already seeing all these presidential campaigns. The presidential elections aren't for another year and a half. The way we're going, we'll start seeing presidential campaigns start up one day after the current one is over. And they'll be spending all their time campaigning. Maybe that's a good thing. They won't have any time left over for corruption and to steal things from us. But don't you think it's a little ridiculous? I mean, I remember when I was a kid, when you were in an election year for president, it sort of cranked up about, just 6 months ahead. And now it's 18 months, almost 2 years of nonstop campaigning for president. I think by the time we get to the elections, everybody's just going to be bored. Yes, we've heard it. We've heard how you stand for the little people. We've heard it all. Go away. Very alarming story coming out of Sputnik News. The U.S. has declared that they are ready to use nuclear weapons to defend Japan. Against who, they won't say, but I'm sure you can all guess. Now, there's another very alarming story. This was reported over in the Daily Mail in Great Britain. Apparently, at a Salt Lake City hotel, just 2 days before Obama is scheduled to visit, an FBI agent had a sniper rifle stolen out of his car's gun safe. Apparently somebody drove up, broke the window, hooked a cable on, and just yanked the whole thing out through the car window. Now, these sniper rifles are not really suitable for hunting. They're only moderately useful for target shooting. Somebody wanted a sniper rifle that doesn't have a chain of ownership that goes anywhere. And I'm very alarmed that this happened in Salt Lake City just before Obama shows up. And if I were Obama's Secret Service, and I'm sure the White House has somebody listening to this show right now, I would be paying serious attention to this theft, because there's a lot of warmongers running around right now talking about how Obama should be out of the Oval Office and Biden should be in, including Biden himself last week. I commented on the time. It almost sounded like Biden was dropping hints about how if he were in the Oval Office, he'd be doing much better for Israel. So we'll keep an eye on that story. But somebody wanted a sniper rifle for a reason, because they're very specialized weapons. They're not useful for hunting. They're way too heavy. Yes, it makes a good target rifle, but again, it's a little bit of overkill when you look at the caliber here. All right, so let's talk about the economy now here. Story over in Oraz.com. Recession rich. Britain's wealthiest have doubled their net worth since the beginning of the economic crisis back in 2008. We're seeing that here in the United States. The rich are getting richer, the poor are being driven further into poverty, and that is economic fascism. And the money junkies even admit wealth inequality is a problem that can lead to severe social upheaval, including revolution, and yet these people are so addicted to other people's money, they can't stop. It really is a psychological illness when somebody wants more money than they themselves actually need to live comfortably. Bernie Madoff is a good example. Co-founder of the NASDAQ, had more money than any one person could ever spend in a lifetime, and he still had that need to go on out and start that Ponzi scheme. that cheated his investors and employees out of $65 billion and then dropped the losses on the American people. We need to recognize that money addiction is just as socially destructive as heroin addiction, meth addiction, alcohol addiction, whatever addiction. It's an addictive process. It is destructive to everybody around it. We don't see it as such because the money addicts all look like they're leading good lives. We want to be them. Actually, I don't, but you get my point on that whole situation. Now, as China moves forward with their new Silk Road, Silk Rail, Silk Skyway, they're saying it might actually open a door to the resolution of the South China Sea area in terms of saying, hey, let's share this resource rather than argue over it. I think it's a good idea. We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently some more police vehicles have been set on fire. Chief of Police Baltimore is out there saying it's outrageous criminals are attacking the police. No, they're a little bit angry. And I love how they keep saying we're trying to find some way to calm the situation down as they line up, you know, all the Kevlar-suited officers, the SWAT team, little armored cars out there. That's not going to calm it down. They wanted this situation to get to this stage. And we know that because if they really wanted things to calm down, then after every single case where police officers exceeded their authority and murdered an innocent American, they would have fired the officer, thrown him in prison, and said, we're going to try and stop this. But over the last few years, with each renewed example of police brutality, and right now the police are murdering 55 times as many innocent Americans as terrorists are. And all we'd hear is, it's in accordance with department policy, like we're supposed to accept that. Now remember, the United States Supreme Court ruled in John Bad Elk versus United States, if the police are acting outside the letter of the law and the Constitution, citizens have a right to resist up to and including the use of lethal force. The police have responded by simply buying themselves larger guns and more armor and more ammunition they're getting from the military. It literally is a war between the government and the American people, and the government has drawn first blood repeatedly over the last couple of years. And I understand that ordinary citizens are angry, and they've been made angry by this arrogant attitude of the police can come in and gun down an unarmed teenager, and we're supposed to just be satisfied that this is what the cops are trained to do and we should all go home. But the government wants the anger and they want you to act on it, because that will escalate to the next situation where there'll be gun bans and suspension of the civil rights and all these other things leading to a true, complete dictatorship, which we know the money junkies want. And by the way, I commented on this last week. I'm absolutely appalled by the corporate media coming out and saying that this crisis was created entirely by the independent media. Because they're saying this degree of police murder of Americans has actually been going on all along. It's just part of the background noise. And the only reason people are upset about it now is those gosh darn independent media are calling attention to it. If they just mind their own business, then the police could go on murdering innocent Americans and nobody would notice and everything would be fine. I think we can all agree murder of an innocent is wrong. Absolutely. And it doesn't matter if the hand doing the killing is wearing a uniform or not. That was the reason for the John Bad Elk decision by the United States Supreme Court, to set the rules that being in a uniform and wearing a badge is not a license to just kill people on a whim. There are very strict rules for the use of lethal force. They bind not only the American people, but the police as well. Let's see. This is not going to calm things down. Police statement: protesters are lawless individuals, criminals with no regard for the community. Yeah, they're trying to calm things down with rhetoric like that. Seen it all before. Getting back to the economy, before the commercial break, I was talking about China's new Silk Road, Silk Airway, Silk Railway, Silk Seaway. They're basically building a new trading network across China, Russia, Central Asia, reaching to Europe without going through any U.S. territories. So the U.S. doesn't get a piece of the action. Pakistan has just signed on. Peace through commerce. And it does work. Our nation was originally founded on we're going to get by making and selling products. We don't need to have wars of conquest because we've got all this rich agricultural land and we've got inventive people and we've got, factories, and we can do just fine just doing business with each other. Unfortunately, the very sort of people who seek political power are the ones who think war is really cool as long as somebody else is fighting it, dying for it. We had an article on whatreallyhappened.com, The War on Cash in 10 Spine-Chilling Quotes. And it's basically some of the so-called leaders of our private central banking system out there arguing why there shouldn't be any cash because only criminals use cash. Bombers use cash. Terrorists use cash. People use cash because they want to be anonymous. Yeah. I don't want the government knowing if I'm buying an adult magazine. And we are guaranteed the right to be anonymous in our commerce under the Fourth Amendment. But we're seeing this growing tendency by the government to want to watch everything that we are doing, and it's none of their business. And more than that, the real reason they're pushing for a cashless society is because there is roughly a little over $1 trillion in cash in our pockets right now in the United States of America. And while that cash is in our pockets, the bankers can't play their computer games with it. They can't use it to make their cash reserves requirements. If they can ban cash, then that's an instant $1 trillion in additional liquidity for the bankers to play with. And it won't change the final outcome. It'll only delay it. But at this point, delay is better than nothing at all in the eyes of these bankers here. So let's talk a little bit more about what's going on with police brutality. There's a very interesting article over at Zero Hedge. Rising police aggression, a telling indicator of our societal decline. And they're absolutely right. As societies start to fall apart, as the people begin to understand they live under a criminal government, the police have to be transformed into a brutalizing force to keep the people down, to keep them from standing up and complaining. And we do live under a criminal government. It's committing war crimes all across the globe. We know that the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the U.S. government. We just recently found out that the largest single group of computer hackers is in fact part of the NSA. And if it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck and smells like a duck, it's a duck. We have a government of the criminal, by the criminal, and for the criminal. And they certainly treat us that way. And just like any other government that has fallen prey into criminal minds, the police are all about controlling the law-abiding citizen, not about controlling crime. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the streets of America right now. The police aren't interested in controlling crime. They're interested in controlling the law-abiding American citizen. And that is at the core of all this police brutality we have been seeing. We have to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Fox News is still totally focused on Baltimore. It's like there's nothing else happening anywhere in the world. Apparently, the Baltimore city government has issued a statement that all parents should immediately locate their children, take them home, get them indoors. So they're expecting things to get more interesting as night comes on over that city. And again, we're seeing this weird dichotomy between statements to the media that they're trying to calm things down, coupled with these outrageous statements calling the protesters outlaws and criminals, and just trying to deny that there is a legitimate argument behind all of this, and that is police brutality against Americans. And it is completely out of control. And there is no reasonable way that anybody is going to sit back and say this is acceptable for the American police to be murdering 55 times as many innocent Americans as the terrorists are. Obviously, if it's wrong for terrorists to kill innocent Americans, it has to be wrong for the police to do so as well. And again, last week we had that horrible story where these cops shot this teenager just standing there with a cell phone, and they uncorked on him, shot him 16 times and killed him. And the chief of police said, well, it's what they're trained to do. Now, Baltimore isn't the only place where a lot of these problems are going on here. Over in St. Louis, very strange story. The St. Louis County Board of Elections have certified Betty McRae as the new mayor of St. Louis. And apparently when she tried to show up for her first day of work, she was blocked by police who don't want her as the mayor. And saying, they said she'd been impeached before even taking office, which was not true. So now the police are starting to act like the Praetorian Guard. They're really in charge of things. Forget what the voters want. Forget the lawful holder of the office. We, the police, have decided we don't want this mayor. We really are into decline and fall of the Roman Empire politics here. Another story, this is coming out of Ex-Republic TV. This happened over in Alpharetta, where this young lady, Amy Bramucci, had apparently reported she was being sexually harassed by a police official. SWAT team broke into her home and shot her 6 times. Supposedly out of concern that she might be suicidal. And there's another case we keep hearing where the police will be called to check on somebody who may, be suicidal or may not be well, can't answer the phone, can't answer the door, and they kick in the door and they kill the person. How is that in any way, shape, or form law enforcement or care of the public? Another video we put up there on whatreallyhappened.com was taken by a bystander where the police beat up a mentally ill homeless man on a beach because his beach umbrella was too big. That was the excuse. And all during this video, you can hear where the police are trying to take away the camera from this person making the video. And she's screaming, "Get your hands off me. You have no right to take this." The courts have said I can make the video. And we are seeing a complete disregard by many police departments of the many court decisions that say, yes, when you are a police officer working on the taxpayer dollar out in public doing your job, you have no expectation of privacy. It is an expression of the First Amendment for citizens to photograph and video you doing what you're doing. And if you don't want video of you breaking the law or violating somebody's constitutional rights, the correct response is don't break the law and don't violate anybody's constitutional rights. Don't go on out and act like a thug and then start smashing cameras and thinking that's going to make things worse, because there's always another camera out there. That's what happened to that other officer. Just grabbed the woman's camera and smashed it on the pavement. Didn't realize there was another camera catching that. Defense in depth. By the way, one of the things we're always hearing from the police departments is, that it's the recruits, the cadets, they're just out of the academy, they're stupid, they're enthusiastic, they're making mistakes. Actually, no. Somebody did a study of these police officers who are committing these egregious crimes and discovered that it's actually the police officers at the end of their career, within months of retirement. They a short time fever, or they just want to go out and bust at least one head or kill one person before they retire. But it's the guys who've been on the force for a lot of years that are doing this thing. Now, last week we were talking about this big stink down here in Hawaii. We have the worst traffic in the entire nation. That's officially stated by the U.S. Department of Transportation. We have gridlock all over the place, and it's been made worse by this new light rail development. And so people just sort of around here, they get used to sitting in traffic, not moving for a long period of time. And there was a gridlock down in Honolulu. The cars were not moving. People were using their cell phones, and the cops just walked down the row writing out these tickets for using your cell phone while driving, even though the cars were not moving. $290 ticket. They made $18,000 in the space of half an hour. And the police chief denied the cops were simply taking advantage of the situation and said this was an operation that had been planned in advance. Meaning they said, next time there's a gridlock, people will use their cell phones, go on out and write tickets. So now we have this story coming out of Canada, where Canadian cops are dressing themselves as homeless people in order to wander around cars and catching people texting in the car behind the driving wheel in order to write them a ticket as well. All righty, we're going to start grabbing some phone calls here. We have got John in Illinois. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, we can plant a flag in history today, and we can find out if black lives really matter, because we have our new Attorney General, who's black and female. Did I mention that?
Yeah, well, I heard that, and, you know, she's also a gun grabber, and she thinks spying on law-abiding Americans is really great. And you know something? We should not get suckered into deciding whether or not we're going to support somebody based on their color or gender. Hillary's going to be running that in 2016. Her unofficial campaign slogan is Vote Vagina. And she's absolutely convinced she's got half the voters already. All the women in America are going to vote for her for this historic chance to have a female, you know, President of the United States of America. Somebody on the level of Catherine the Great, Queen Zingwa of Angola, or Ursabet Bathory.
So can we show up at a rally with a big sign, I love vagina? Think that'll sell?
I'm sure Hillary's people will love it. But, I don't think this new Attorney General is any less corrupt than the last one. They've all been equally corrupt, going all the way back to William French Smith, who made it okay for the CIA to smuggle cocaine into this country and sell it to our kids.
No, and and that's the point we have to make. We have to make that point because all these people, all this Black Lives Matter stuff, Abby Martin throws it in our face. She tweets out about the rally. She wants to get, all this stuff. If these local states and municipalities won't prosecute these egregious civil rights violations, then I would assume...
Now, wait a minute. That's the spin they're trying to put on, that this is a racial issue, Black Lives Matter. Actually, all lives matter, and the reality is the police are murdering 25 times as many white people as black, but the blacks are getting the media attention because they want to pull the focus away from unbridled police brutality against all Americans and try and turn it into a racial issue, and it is not. That's just the way the corporate media is spinning it. The issue is not racism. The issue is dictatorship. The issue is tyranny. The issue is brutality. The issue is repression of the American people at a time of growing government tyranny.
Right, and the protesters are George Soros funded. That's what they're doing. These people get paid to go out there and organize. Absolutely. No, but that's the point. I'm going, somebody ought to, okay, let's take your big hashtag Black Lives Matter and direct it at the Attorney General, because if this state's not going to deal with this white cop beating this black person or killing them, then guess what? Take it to the feds. She should.
This is not about white cop beating black people. It's all cops beating all people. Thank you for the call, John. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with John in Barbados after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and I want to do a couple of real quick stories here before we go back to the phones, and I know John in Barbados is waiting. I'm going to get to you in just a minute. Another police brutality story out of South Carolina. This one has a sort of semi-happy ending because the two officers involved were arrested and charged and may spend at least a year in prison. The story being that one of the officers spotted this mentally disabled woman, walking in front of a house for sale, assumed she may have broken in there, and basically demanded what she was doing. When the woman didn't respond immediately, he tased her, and then kept saying, put your hands behind the back, and tased her 4 more times. Now, when you've been tased, you are unable to decide what your body's going to be doing. And then the other officer came back and tased her twice more, and then offered to let her go if she would let him tase her in the head. Now, the police departments are getting all this whiz-bang, high-tech spyware, Stingray and everything, something you may not know, and this goes all the way back to the war in Vietnam. They have spy rocks now. These are fake rocks with little tiny TV cameras in them that they just basically fling over to where they think you are in order to spy on you. Here's another story. Texas is pushing legislation requiring police to learn how not to shoot dogs. Been a huge outcry over the cops just showing up and killing dogs for no reason whatsoever. I have an idea. How about legislation requiring police to learn how not to shoot law-abiding American citizens? Why are we not out there doing that? Because there is clearly a need for that. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. John in Barbados. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I'm looking at this situation in Louisiana and the police preventing the mayor taking her position in the town hall.
You mean St. Louis? St. Louis.
Yep, St. Louis. Yeah. Well, I'm sure the governor of the state should mobilize about 3 to 5,000 National Guardsmen and send them down there to walk the lady into the office. And if the police violate the Constitution further, then allow the military, who also take an oath to the Constitution, to take action against the police.
Well, the question I think that needs to be raised, apparently she was blocked from going to her job by about 24 police officers. Were these 24 just acting on their own, or was somebody in command authority saying, don't let this woman into the office? Because obviously that is a situation in which these officers can be fired, and the office, the command authority fired by the mayor, for doing that. So it strikes me as an extraordinarily reckless situation. I'm unaware of exactly what their point of contention was with allowing this woman into the office. Did they have some concern about, vote fraud? I mean, the election had been certified accurate. Did they not like her because she's a woman? Did they not like her? I mean, I don't know if she was black or not. I don't know what's going on, but clearly the police are in this case, acting outside their lawful authority, and they should be fired immediately.
Well, I mean, if I was that lady, my first action once the National Guard had walked me into the office would be to fire the whole police department.
Well, at least those officers and everybody above them who went along with this, yeah. I mean, maybe not the entire police department, but who knows? Maybe they were afraid that's exactly what she was going to do. But in any event, this is a case of the police starting to act like they are the government itself, and they are not. We saw the same kind of abuses with the Praetorian Guard in ancient Rome.
Well, I'm just confused as to, all this murder by the U.S. police force of American citizens, even completely unarmed innocent citizens. You mentioned one earlier. I mean, the guy that went into the house and shot the 7-year-old on the couch, dead, I mean, he's got away with it.
He got his job back. He got his job back. Yeah, it is. It's ridiculous. And that's what really powered Baltimore. It is not an issue of racism. They're trying to spin it that way so that, the white people will say, oh, it's just a black problem. No, it isn't. It's a problem for every single American when the police basically have been told it's open season on everybody.
Well, if you remember, many months ago, I mentioned the fact that America is not the America I remember from the 60s and 70s. And society is degenerating so fast, I just can't believe it.
Yeah, it's there. And I just hope that this situation in Baltimore is not being intentionally fanned up to try and create a crisis where, the Constitution can be suspended. This is the fourth try at it. This is the fourth try after Trayvon Martin, Ferguson, Eric Garner, and this is number 4, where they're trying to get nationwide race riots going.
I mean, if they do get this thing going and the Constitution is suspended, I wonder what happens to the election, and will Obama still be president?
Anything is possible. The instant Obama declares a national emergency, I mean, there are all those FEMA orders that can be activated. I mean, who knows what can go on. And that's why I'm hoping that everybody listening to this broadcast, okay, regardless of your color, be calm. Don't give the federal government the excuse for a crackdown that they clearly want.
It seems that the message is getting out, but it's not being too effective looking at Boston.
Okay, well, let's see. I'm looking at Fox News right now. They're repeating the situation, repeating the call for parents to get their kids home and inside right now. Mostly from the helicopter, it's looking mostly calm. And again, over the weekend, Al Jazeera made a point of saying the vast majority of the protests and demonstrations are peaceful. The violence is just in one little tiny area that just happens to be in front of the American media cameras.
Well, yeah, I mean, the agents provocateurs will be out in force, I'm sure.
They already are. We've got people in Baltimore saying that all of the troublemakers, they don't recognize them, they don't live there. We know that some of these people from Ferguson have been flown in to fan this stuff up.
Well, I believe they also flew people into Ferguson to fan that up.
Yeah, they did. We know they did. Some of the people that were trying to fan up the race issue around Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman showed up at Ferguson, showed up in the wake of Eric Garner. Now they're here. This is their career, rousing the rabble out there, trying to fan up race hate. At the very least, even if they're not trying to suspend the Constitution, they want race riots because that gives the politicians something to run on next year that isn't the economy and isn't the war.
Seems that the government is using these official actors in all sorts of situations. Provocation, the Boston bombing, you name it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, listen, I'm having a hard time understanding you on this phone connection, so I'm going to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're coming up here on the top of the hour news break. Want to talk about the Clintons because the Clinton baggage is starting to pile up. Apparently, the Clinton Foundation is now under fire for a lot of reasons, but apparently some of the drugs that they paid to distribute to AIDS patients turned out to be completely useless. Little better than placebos. And so everybody's scratching their heads and saying why they were doing that. The Clinton Foundation has been caught with questionable entries on their books. Now they're saying, oh, it was just a mistake. We made a mistake. We're going to refile all our taxes. And basically, some donations were simply blended in with government grants in order to hide who the donations were coming from. Now there is a watchdog for foundations and charities that is out there saying that the behavior of the Clinton Foundation has met their criteria for it to be little more than a slush fund. They have only spent about little over 10% of the money they've taken in on actual charitable work. And all the other money goes for travel, first-class travel for the Clintons, media presentation, and huge amounts of money going out to people supporting Hillary's coming campaign. It's a slush fund right in full view. And the question we have at this point, we know how the IRS went after conservative groups, Tea Party, dissidents. Where was the IRS when the Clinton Foundation was engaged in all this very questionable behavior? Why wasn't the IRS doing its job on somebody where there's really a question of impropriety going on? All right, there's the music. We've got to take a break for our top of the hour news segment. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. I'm looking at the Fox News feed from Baltimore. The police are now acknowledging that it's just one small group behind all the violence, and everybody else is being nice and polite, which is what Al Jazeera was reporting. And it's just one group of agent provocateurs that are in there. Now, before we get on back to the Clintons, I want to do a clarification on the story out of St. Louis about the mayor who was blocked by police from taking office. It's not St. Louis itself. It's a suburb, Kinloch, Missouri. And apparently this is a very tiny town. And even though the earlier report was that the election of the mayor was certified by the County Board of Elections, but apparently that is now in dispute because apparently evidence has surfaced of massive votes by unregistered people. And I say massive because actually the entire election was something like the town has 300 residents, and the mayor won the April 7th election with 38 votes to her main opponent's 18. Now they've determined some 27 of the votes came from people who are not actually inside the city and shouldn't have been listed as registered voters. So it's not as black and white as you might think. The police apparently are standing up, and the Board of Aldermen is saying that no, this lady is not the mayor, and one other person with her is being blocked, and they're taking legal action. And so it's actually shaping up to be a new Battle of Athens. You know, a little moment where the people stood up and defeated a crooked election, and it looks like it's happening again. So it's not completely black and white what's going on, and hopefully it will be resolved peacefully. Now, getting on back to the Clintons, Hillary just can't stop lying. And there was this very interesting article over at redstate.com about Hillary Clinton's astroturfed grandparents. And Hillary is out there trying to sell herself as just like any other ordinary American. And she was out there making comments about, you know, how her grandparents and how they'd come to this country and how her grandfather went to work in a lace mill in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and worked there every day until he retired at 65. The only problem is the grandfather actually died very young. She's just making this stuff up. Whatever she thinks the voters want to hear, that's what she's going to be saying. Now, along with the new current scandals from the foundation, we need to remember that Hillary Rodham Clinton and her husband Bill's career has been marked by continuing scandals all the way back to when they first emerged on the public scene. And there was an article over at mrctv.org, 10 scandals involving Hillary Clinton you may have forgotten. Chinagate. This is where the Clinton-Gore campaign in 1996 took bribes from Chinese banks. And the Chinese embassy, basically this is, well, excuse me, there was that whole Ron Brown situation, who was selling seats on Department trade missions to China. And that was under investigation. And Ron Brown said he was not going to take the fall for that all by himself. And then, of course, had that very mysterious plane crash that ended that whole thing. There was the Travelgate scandal. That one's getting a lot of coverage, talking about how Hillary wanted to load up the White House travel office with a bunch of cronies from Arkansas, fired the existing staff, had the FBI investigate Billy Dale, who was standing up and saying, we are being terminated without just cause. Almost destroyed his life. He spent something like $750,000 to clear his name, and then was audited by the IRS for 3 years after that. Of course, we all do remember the Whitewater scandal. Very shady land, real estate deals involving money laundering, and that was not the only one. In addition to Whitewater, there were two more, Castle Grande and Flowerwood. And then, of course, there's the case of Vincent Foster, which anybody who's a reader of my website or listens to my radio show knows that we have not forgotten that one. Not at all. Murder made to look like a suicide here. There was the Filegate scandal, in which the Clinton White House was getting FBI files on people just to get the dirt on them without due process. The cattle futures trade, where Hillary, who had no prior experience in investing, all of a sudden, just by reading the newspapers, was able to guess correctly to the tune of $100,000. And she started with just $1,000, grew to $100,000, basically looked like, laundering a bribe. Lesser-known scandal, Lootergate. When Bill and Hillary moved out of the White House, they took a whole bunch of the furniture with them, even though the donors of the furniture donated it to the White House, not to the Clintons personally. And ultimately, the Clintons returned some of the purloined furniture when pressure was put on them. Then there was the drug dealer donor scandal. We've had this one on the front page of What Really Happened, where known cocaine smuggler Jorge Cabrera was a regular donor to the Clinton campaign, so much so that he got to visit the White House without Secret Service groping and fondling him, had his picture taken in front of the White House Christmas tree with Hillary Clinton, had another picture taken with Al Gore. Then there was the scandal over Norman Ewan Hugh, pyramid, he was a Ponzi scheme operator and a Democratic donor. And those are just the tip of the iceberg. One that a lot of people have forgotten about was the Arkansas tainted blood scandal. And this was a case where prisoners in Arkansas prisons, when Bill Clinton was governor, were paid a few pennies to harvest their blood, which was then resold to a company that was making medications for hemophiliacs. The problem was these prisoners in Arkansas had AIDS and hepatitis, and they altered the prison records to make it look like these were healthy people. The blood was then sold at a huge markup, huge amounts of money coming in, was then sent out and gave all these unsuspecting patients AIDS and hepatitis around the world. And Bill Clinton, as governor, was linked in very much with that. Now, Hillary is already seeing dissension in her own ranks. A top Democratic money man who was recruited by Clinton's campaign is saying he's got to pull away. He doesn't want to do fundraising for Clinton. He can't do it with a clear conscience because of all the unanswered questions swirling around Hillary. Amazingly enough, a man of conscience. John Cooper is out there. He was out there early on, with the Hill starters and said, I can't do it. So we have some people of integrity already quitting the Hillary Rodham Clinton scandal. By the way, over the weekend, I put up a page. I've been making these little bogus horror movie posters with Hillary as the star. And they're just spoofs and parodies. And I decided to just go ahead and put them out there, and I got a lot of positive emails about them. And if any of you have any other ideas, famous horror movie monsters, posters and stuff that would be suitable for this kind of a parody, just go ahead and send them in. So we'll just keep these things going. Now then, the Adelson primary is underway in Las Vegas, as in Sheldon Adelson, who is personally I think is the biggest single donor to the GOP cause. And all of the candidates are out there just promising that they will support Israel, that they'll block the Iran deal. They're not even talking about politics in America or what's going on with the homeless and hungry, the infrastructure, because after all, Sheldon Adelson doesn't care. He's buying candidates to work for the government of Israel. And that's what the candidates are promising him, to get that money. And this is why we used to have strict limits on campaign contributions to politicians, to keep them subservient to the people and not simply for sale to the highest bidder. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we have been clapping our hands in glee as more and more of these highly paid talking heads on the corporate media suffer the embarrassment of having their exaggerations exposed. Had Brian Williams, Bill O'Reilly, and now we've got this new howler from NBC and their trusted reporter, Richard Engel. And this one is not simply a case of exaggerating their own experience to bolster their reputation. This was a story that impacted national policy. Back in December 2012, Engel claimed that he was kidnapped along with 4 other journalists inside Syria by pro-Assad Shiite forces. And then Engel went on to say how the pro-Assad captors tortured reporters and even killed their Free Syrian Army rebel chaperone before he was rescued. Well, the story turns out that Engel probably should have been a little bit more skeptical. And mind you, he is fluent in Arabic. But apparently he was part of a false flag operation to frame Assad for brutalizing journalists. And either he was incredibly stupid and naive, or he was part of the fake Syria kidnapping story. So here we are, 2.5 years later, the principal players are finally admitting, yeah, it was fake. Made you look. So, let's see. Story over at, actually it's a YouTube video. Corporate media fails us again on the TPP coverage, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and also its other one, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Agreement. The corporate media aren't reporting those to the American people at all. Americans who are not here on the Internet and the independent media, both of them, don't know these things are happening or what's inside. And that's intentional. The corporate media serves the corporate government. The corporate government wants these treaties. They know that the people are not going to like what's in there. They're trying to rush them through now because a lot of what's in there is starting to leak out and people don't like it. It basically transfers sovereignty from our own government to the hands of corporate negotiators. We're seeing the rise of the corporate state over the nation state. And as bad as it gets, nation-states still have to be responsive to the civil populations. Corporate leadership is under no such obligation. You heard the CEO of Nestle. You don't have a natural right to water. You have to work and buy it from us, and if you can't afford it, well, then you'll just die of thirst. Another story out over at IntelliHub. CNN reporter stutters through CIA script. ISIS is planning an attack on America. They're coming to get you. We got to get them first here. Apparently, the specific threat from ISIS is going to be in California. Maybe they're going to go for those Nestle plants. Now, United Technologies is the company that produces the jet engines for the F-35 fighter, which is turning out to be one of history's greatest military boondoggles. And apparently, tests by the Government Accountability Office is showing that the reliability of these engines from United Technologies' Pratt & Whitney unit is, quote, very poor, less than half of what it should be. And we've already seen how these aircraft will be taking off and the engines will self-immolate. Not only is this wasteful, not only is it failing to produce a usable, reliable weapon system, it is telegraphing to the rest of the world the decline of American technology. We can't build the wonderful things we used to build. Earlier today, I was over on YouTube looking at that Most Honest 3 Minutes of Television, the clip from the opening show of HBO's The Newsroom, and I'm sure sorry that show's off the air because I really liked it, where Will McAvoy is up there saying America's not the greatest nation on earth. This is another example. We can't do what we used to do. Too many corners have been cut, too much reliance on overseas providers. Too many of our best and brightest manufacturing minds have been lured to other countries that have a deeper respect for manufacturing. In our country, our entire political and financial elite, manufacturing is something dirty that you do out in the backyard and you don't talk about it in polite society. You get grease under your fingernails. Oh, we don't want to do manufacturing. Manufacturing is what powers a nation's economy. All right, the House has passed a cybersecurity bill that further erodes our privacy and doesn't seem to actually have any security benefits. Remember, last week we were talking about a document, official U.S. government document was leaked that basically came out and said they cannot actually find a single instance where the NSA spying on law-abiding Americans actually thwarted a terror attack. The NSA tried to take credit for a bunch of them, which turned out to be ordinary police work or informants. But the NSA spying on all of our telecommunications, they can't actually show that it thwarted a single terror attack. They certainly have not reined in the cyber criminals, some of whom seem to be working for NSA. Can't stop all those people from sending Viagra ads to our email box loaded with all kinds of malware. They're absolutely totally useless. Very expensive, very wasteful, totally useless. That's the federal government for you right there. So we're going to spend more money to accomplish absolutely nothing except to erode privacy rights of law-abiding American citizens. And possibly because of this and other evils. I'm looking at a story over at Market Oracle in Great Britain. U.S. states secession movement ready to take hold. And we're hearing a lot about this on the independent media and the blogs and in the foreign press. Obviously, corporate media is not dealing with it. But there are a lot of states starting to say, you know, we might be better off on our own, just like over in the European Union. Greece and Portugal and Spain are starting to think, hey, we might be better off on our own without supporting this gigantic overlord federal government and this Ponzi scheme central bank. There are secession movements here in Hawaii. There are at least 3 I know of over in Texas. Another one up in Alaska. There's this group, the Western States Coalition, all the way back in the 1990s, wanted to just take the western half of the country and break that off. And they're not talking war, they're not talking civil war, they want a cordial severance. And of course, the whole point of the Declaration of Independence is that people and nations people have a natural right to break off and form their own country, and that right is reiterated in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, obviously, the federal government is out there saying, you don't have a right to leave no matter how much we abuse you, and we'll abuse you even more if you try to, because that's what happened in the Civil War. But a lot of people really think we'd be a lot better without that central federal government. And for that federal government to be trying to start a world war with that low amount of popular support, that is a recipe for disaster. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're keeping an eye on the situation in Baltimore. Apparently, the CVS store in Baltimore is now on fire. And this does feel very much like the Rodney King riots, which we know was a put-up job. There were two code names for it, Operation Garden Plot and Cable Splice. So it does look like they're just going to run this up as hard as they can and see if they can trigger race riots in other cities across America, justifying a national state of emergency. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Bob in North Carolina. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. You have one of the best shows on, without a doubt. I think you're somewhat of a Renaissance man, and you appreciate music as well. I wanted to ask you two questions, maybe the latter one first. One was, in your bumper music, you've got a lady who sings a song, kind of folksy song about the 9/11 Twisted Steel.
Yes.
About who is that? I've been looking all over. It's just a great song. I'd like to have that to play.
Okay, her name is Thanea Crone, K-R-O-H-N. The album is called Kaleidoscope. She very graciously, well, actually, she wrote that song inspired by my website and graciously allows us to use it as bump music. Now, if you go to the website for the radio show, which is wrhradio.com, about midway down the page, there's a link for the music from the radio show, and that link will take you to a player where you can hear the whole song in its entirety, and there's a link from that player song to Thanea Crone's website that you can follow.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. You're a lucky man to have that.
Yes.
And I really enjoy your What Really Happened. I actually found your website first, and I found you on the radio. I stopped a while back listening to radio because it just seems like a lot of guys are out there just to divide the nation up, and you really don't fit a category. I mean, I listened to some of the guys who are left in our town. They talk what you talk. I was trying to bring the Tea Party and the Occupy Wall Street people together, but everyone fights against that. But anyway, let me get to my question. You can comment on this. I listened to some very serious people and many shows and many serious guests with political experience, and they all talk about getting back to the Constitution. And to me, that's sort of like if I was watching a football game and in the middle of the game they flash on the screen, now all football contestants must go through the end of the end zone to score a touchdown. And then a lot of the players are running around and they think they scored a touchdown, but they didn't. My point or analogy is that I think that with the Senate Report 93-549 in 1973 to end the War Powers Act, with the Emergency War Powers Statute, the Act of 1871, FDR's Commercial Code where there's no more federal common law, I think we're under a functional martial law still. We're still at war. We have no Constitution, so we're sort of like dancing around the end zone, wondering why we haven't scored a touchdown.
Well, I would go back. First of all, we're not talking a sporting event. We're talking about our country, and especially the country we're getting ready to leave to the following generation here. The United States Supreme Court ruled in Marbury versus Madison that laws that are repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. The government has gotten away with stretching the rules because they'll pass a law and people don't really understand how it violates the Constitution and they go along with it. But at some point, the people who are talking about getting back to the Constitution, what they're talking about is all Americans standing up and saying, look, this law is no longer binding because it's unconstitutional. That law is and basically pare away all of this crust that has been built up around our original governmental structure for the benefit of the Wall Street money junkies and the war hawks and special interests, and get on back to that Constitution and that Bill of Rights and say to the government, look, that Bill of Rights is the contract with America. Those are the rules under which we allow you to manage our national sovereignty, to be the caretaker of our nation. You're not our boss, you're our janitor. And if you don't want to play by those rules, have the decency to leave our government buildings, and we'll find somebody who'll do the job and play by the rules.
Well, brother, I agree with you absolutely. My only point is that I think, I only use the football analogy because that's where a lot of people are and they're like mean. But I really think Americans don't understand what is constitutional. Most federal government employees, they have no Bill of Rights. As soon as they walk into that federal building, those rights are wiped away. And so when I hear, you're an excellent source for information like this, but I'm not sure how to convince people, because even at the local level, it seems as though they're just blind sheep following each other, and they don't understand what the law is. They don't understand what the Constitution is. And many of the talk show hosts here I push back on, I'm banned from most of the radio stations just because I want to talk about real issues. They don't understand, or they think it's boring, or you're caught up in the minutiae to actually talk about the Constitution, or exactly where we are today. I think first we have to get out of denial and admit that we're under a War Powers Act. When I hear people talk about the super executive, he actually does have all of the rights of the proclamation of the provisions of 400 or 500 plus federal government agencies, and we have no property. He could take what he wants. He could do what he wants.
Hang on, Bob. Okay, he claims to have that authority, but again, under Marbury versus Madison, he doesn't. He's basically committing theft under color of law, under color of authority. And by the way, even if you go to work for the U.S. government, the government can't contractually take away your rights because the government didn't give those rights in the first place. I know Common Core teaches that rights are a gift from your beneficent government. No, the Bill of Rights recognizes pre-existing rights the government may not trespass on. And so in point of fact, it is completely unconstitutional and illegal for the government to require surrender of your rights as a condition of employment, or for that matter, to declare a constitution-free zone within 100 miles of every U.S. border, which for here in Hawaii, that's the entire state. They really can't do that. Under Marbury versus Madison, that is a null and void law.
And I agree with you completely, but who's going to stop them? They are doing it. Many whistleblowers within the federal government are in jail today. And I'll give you this. Just like that, Sergeant Bergdahl or whatever his name was.
Bergdahl.
Yeah. I heard the right wingers always saying, well, hey, they didn't go after the other hostages, but they sure did go after and waste a lot of our military hardware to go after this guy. Well, guess what? They own him. He's government property. And they don't care about the rest of us slaves. And so they will drone bomb us. They don't care, just like the police. And everything's a meme. For instance, the deflation gate. I heard so many people repeat this. The deflation gate was a joke on us. And they keep playing a joke on us, and they laugh in our face. Because the real deflation that happened, the football wasn't deflated. Nobody can prove that. The point is that we're being deflated. And what we are, we're sitting in the barber chair, and we're getting a haircut. And they've already cut 25% of our hair off, and we're still asleep. And I wonder when we'll wake up, because eventually we will be shaved bald, and the guy next to us will be a corporatist who says, hey, they had to do that because you people had life, you're nasty. And somehow...
Okay, Bob, I need to cut you off. We're coming up on a commercial break here. I'll tell you how this is going to resolve itself. Okay? When a government has lost the faith and trust and support of their own people, they are doomed. The same thing happened in the Soviet Union because of the samizdat. The Soviet people came to understand their government was lying to them all the time, and they simply stopped listening, obeying, complying, and the Soviet Union fell apart. The same thing is going to happen here because the American people now understand the extent to which they're being lied to and manipulated and how far off the constitutional reservation the federal government has gone. And this is a nonviolent solution. Just kick back and let the system destroy itself, which it's already doing. Okay?
But true, even the secessionists will use Federal Reserve notes, so there's no change.
No, wait a minute. The secessionists aren't saying they're going to use Federal Reserve notes. They're talking about where they're going to set up their own currency.
You're going to have to kill off a large corporation to do it.
No, they're not. All you need is a government and a printing press and everybody having trust and faith in the new currency to take place of the old. We got to take a break for commercials. Thanks a lot, Bob. We're going to leave you go, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're almost to the end of the month of April. May is upon us. And over this last weekend here in Hawaii, we noticed our temperature started dropping again. It actually got very cold last night. UK weather. Britain battered by snow, sleet, and gale force winds. Drivers told to prepare for treacherous conditions. And as John from Barbados would say, that's just global warming powder. It's not snow. Really, you're not seeing snow. It's just global warming powder. Arctic blast bringing snow, sleet, and gale force winds likely to linger over May bank holiday weekend. Also across Scotland and Ireland, and they are expecting 2 feet of snow in Colorado. Now, story over at Stephen Goddard's WordPress account. Rumors of the demise of climate science have not been exaggerated, and they're pointing out another one of these botched predictions. Remember, 2000 snowfalls are now a thing of the past. Wrong. Al Gore predicted summer of last year the Arctic would be ice-free. Wrong. 6 years ago, climate experts announced the end of multi-year ice in the Arctic. What do we mean by multi-year? We're talking about ice that persists through the summer melt season and forms the foundation for another layer of ice. So you have pieces of ice that have been there 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And 6 years ago, the climate experts, the ones who are insisting that your activity is warming the planet, said there would be no multi-year ice in the Arctic. Well, multi-year ice now covers about half the Arctic basin. Canada just reissued their official map of Canada, which shows an increase in the ice pack since the last map was issued. And the carbon Nazis are out there saying, well, they just changed the way they calculate the ice. There's really not more ice there. Really, you should ignore the map and just trust us here. Now, finally, we are seeing some independent research into what the heck has been going on. The Global Warming Policy Foundation, this is the climate skeptic think tank led by the former Tory Chancellor Lord Lawson, is going back to look at all of the adjustments that has been done to temperature data. Because we have shown time and time again, the raw temperature data shows a cooling world. But we're not supposed to look at the raw data. We're supposed to let the global warming people adjust it and seasonally process it and run it through all kinds of computers so that declining temperatures magically become growing, increasing temperatures. And the question is, why are they having to adjust the temperatures anyway? And so they're starting an investigation saying, was there any legitimate reason for them to be altering the raw temperature data whatsoever? Was there any reason for them to be shutting down temperature stations in the cooler rural areas and relying on temperature stations in the hot urban heat islands, in the outflow of air conditioning, in one documented case right next to a trash incinerator? Might it have skewed the results? Yes, of course it did. That's what it was supposed to do. Another article coming out over here from evansat.com, Why I'm a Denier. Hint, because it is crap. And it always has been. This whole thing was a fraud. Politicians love to take something that's happening naturally, declare it to be an urgent crisis, and then offer to sell you a solution in exchange for increased tax money and obedience. And that's what they were trying to do with global warming. And when they started this scam back in the 1990s, the world was getting warmer. And then Mother Nature pulls a fast one on them, or to be more accurate, the sun. Solar output went into a decline, and the world started getting colder. And instead of saying, oh, we were wrong, like a real scientist would do, they started hiding the decline. They started altering the data, adjusting the data, rigging the computer codes. When that leak happened at the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, and it leaked out not only emails where they're talking about how they have to hide the fact of cooling from the public or they're going to lose all their funding. There was actually source code for the computer programs that would take the raw data and crunch out these hockey stick graphs. And the code showed where the rigging and the fakery was in there. And remember when Hadley CRU came out with all these graphs showing, oh, the world is still getting warmer, don't worry about it. And other scientists said, can we have the raw data under the principle of reproducibility, which is a foundation principle of science. If this scientist says, I started with this data, I did this process, I got this result, it should be reproducible. I should be able to take the same data, apply the same methodology, and get the same result. Hadley CRU said, we threw out the raw data. We didn't have enough room on the hard drive. That was their excuse. I'm not kidding you. Like they can't go down to Best Buy and pick up an extra hard drive to save the raw data. You don't throw out raw data. It's just like in the recording industry. You never throw out the original raw recorded tracks. Somewhere down the road there may be new software that makes them sound even better. You don't throw out the original negatives of the movies that you make in case somebody wants to do a re-edit, recut, or an update. Only when you're hiding something does the raw information get thrown out. In the case of Hadley CRU, the raw temperature data. In the case of the BBC, the original video of them reporting the collapse of Building 7 26 minutes before it actually happened. That was BBC's excuse. Oh, we ran out of room. We just threw all that tape away. Are you kidding? The defining event of the 20th century, late 20th century? That video was worth a fortune being licensed to future documentaries and programs, and they just threw it out. Sure. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. Now then, the people are speaking via their wallet. Organic food sales have risen about 34% in the last 4 years. Organic food is such big business, it's in such high demand, they're having to import it from other countries because most of the food in this United States is now all GMO, chemical stuff. Now, Chipotle, the fast food restaurant, has scored a big one. They have just declared that they are going to go 100% non-GMO. And it's a big part of their advertising, and they were already starting to take market share away from McDonald's, because McDonald's does not have a reputation for serving healthy food. It's delicious food, but people are very, very concerned about just what it is that's in that 100% beef patty. Because we've started to find out that when companies use names like beef or tuna, it's not fish and cow. It is some kind of a melange that they're allowed to brand as beef or tuna. If you go to the supermarket and you buy a can of tuna fish, there can be any one of 17 different species of fish in that can. They're still allowed to call it tuna. We're running out of food. And that's why the government is allowing food companies to just play fast and loose, to go on selling you what they want to sell you. So McDonald's was already in trouble compared to food companies that emphasize the safety and health of their food, like Subway. And now Chipotle is going 100% non-GMO. That's my new fast food favorite restaurant. That's where I'm going from here on. Meanwhile, Monsanto is being hit by a class action lawsuit regarding false claims made for the safety of Roundup and glyphosate. The claim is that glyphosate only targets plant-based enzymes and therefore is completely harmless to humans. Not really, because humans who are eating the plants are getting the enzymes inside their gut and their after products. And the advertising is objectively false and inherently misleading, and they've been hit with a class action lawsuit. About time, I think. Alrighty, let's see. Japanese maglev train breaks speed record. Hits 375 miles per hour during latest test run. The U.S. came out and said, well, we've got trains that'll do 150 miles per hour. Of course, they don't actually run them at that speed on these deteriorated rails. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get some animation work done. I got to do Jim Goddard's show up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Please call your local talk radio station and ask them to carry the programming from Genesis Communication. They can go to gcnlive.com if they want more information. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.